Hi, I'm Selena and welcome to Selena's Musings. Today's musing is a little bit different and the tone is going to be a little bit different. As you can tell from the title, this video is about grief and it's actually inspired by some grief that I'm going through right now. So, I'm gonna ask y'all to bear with me. It is difficult to do, but I figure that as I go through this process, maybe I can help somebody else. And so, with that said, I hope that maybe this can help you deal with your grief if it's something that you're going through right now. Before we dive into it, I do want to dedicate this video to a very special person that I just lost and many in the community have lost. This is a very special person who was not just a member of our community, but a true leader within the community. Her name is Rachel Willis, and she was a wonderful everything: mother, friend, advocate, leader. She was truly a very special person, and she's going to continue to live on with all of us in our hearts and in our work, and her legacy is going to continue on. But that said, we're grieving right now. And I think there's always going to be some grief there. But as we process it, like I said, I want to kind of provide some guidance for others, but also really, frankly, for myself. Like I really had to dig deep and think about, how can I, as a person who is an empath, really process this grief in a healthy way. So some of you might be wondering, what is an empath? An empath is a person that feels very deeply. We're often referred to as highly sensitive people. And in addition to feeling our own emotions very deeply, we feel the emotions of other people pretty strongly. We can sense them, we can pick up on them, and they affect us. There's a lot of information out there on empaths, and I'll share a little bit of information below. I may do a video in the future on empaths and a little bit more about what that means generally. But again, simple definition, it's somebody who feels very deeply, not only their own emotions, but the emotions of others. So, while I'm making this video to really help people who are empaths, are highly sensitive, these are things that can help pretty much anybody. So if you don't find yourself to be, empathic or sensitive, cool. We all still have to deal with grief. So if this helps you, stick around. So first, I kind of want to talk a little bit about the process of grief. And there are actually a few frameworks. One of them, and it's escaping my mind who designed this framework. I'll be sure to kind of like plug their name in this box somewhere, and you'll also see in the description box below. But originally it was a 5-step model. It's been expanded to include 7 steps, and the first step is shock, right? So whenever you're dealing with grief, it's usually precipitated by some bad news. It's something that you've lost. So whether it's the loss of a loved one, or of a job that you really loved, or of a relationship, maybe it's a divorce or whatever the severe deep loss is, there's usually an initial shock where you're in somewhat of a disbelief and kind of paralyzed by the bad news. Then it's typical to go through some sort of denial. And it's kind of like a real severe disbelief. You can't really accept it fully. It's just hard to really accept that it's true. And then there's a period of anger. And, while these steps don't always happen in a particular order, I definitely found myself, once I came out of shock and denial, feeling very, very angry. And sometimes where there's not anybody, like a specific person or entity that you can blame, you just feel generally angry, right? So you might feel like if you lost someone to natural causes, or, you lost a job for like a random reason that had nothing to do with you, wasn't your boss's fault or whatever, right? You may just kind of feel angry at the world. Like, why do good people have to leave early and people who are terrible get to have these long lives, right? Like you might feel generally angry at the world. And I was kind of going through that. Yesterday. And then you sometimes go through a period of what they call bargaining, which is where you're really trying to seek alternate solutions or figure things out, or, in some cases, it's almost like an elevated form of denial where you're trying to work out, how can I make this thing not be real or final? Then there's usually a period of depression where you're feeling really, really down, you're feeling really, really low. It's really difficult for you to do things. And I've definitely experienced that. And we often also will experience a stage called testing, where you're also trying to find different alternatives and solutions and kind of figuring out how you can move forward with this new reality. And this is a stage that you usually hit before you finally get to acceptance, where you've accepted that unfortunately you have experienced this loss and that you're going to have to figure out how to move forward and live with that loss and with that grief. And I think a part of acceptance is accepting the fact that while time does heal, you will always have some level of grief. I often hear people talk about it like grief doesn't mean that you fully let go of the pain, but you learn how to live with it. And I think it dulls over time. But you'll have moments. I mean, unfortunately, I grew up in a community that had a lot of violence, and I lost, quite a few friends at a young age. And there are still moments where, I'll just get a ping of pain thinking about somebody that I lost when I was like 14 years old. But what I will say is that as you go through the grieving process, more than the pain, you feel those happy memories, and you kind of feel those joyous memories, and you're able to, I think for me, one of the signs of healing is that when you think about that person, you're able to sometimes separate the pain from the positive of the memory, right? When it's fresh, anything that you see that reminds you of that loss, it's deeply painful. But over time, you're able to kind of you have moments where you can experience those joyous memories without that deep ping of pain. So I think that's something that time will give you if you actively work towards the healing. And I think that's key. Sometimes we just think that we can numb the pain, and that if we just kind of ignore the pain and suppress it, it'll just go away. But the harsh reality is that it does not. Like, if you don't process it, if you don't really allow yourself to actively heal and go through these stages, then it's just going to keep resurfacing as a fresh wound. So you really have to go through that healing process. With that said, I want to talk a little bit, now that we've kind of talked about the stages of grief that we generally experience. What are some things that you can do and really should do, especially if you're an empath, when you're dealing with the grief process? And I'm looking down because I did write some notes. I know that's not typical for me. I don't usually write notes, but grief, it does have your mind kind of all over the place. So bear with me. I think one, and this is especially for empaths or highly sensitive people, you really have to understand the depth of your pain and just how big it can be, because you're not just experiencing your own pain, you're experiencing the pain of those around you. And I think that's one of the difficult things about collective grief. And frankly, even before this tragedy, I was having a really tough time dealing with the collective grief that a lot of folks in my community were feeling around, a lot of the police brutality that's been going on, a lot of the injustice that's been going on. And, you really feel it in your body, right? Like, I've literally been feeling this heavy feeling in my chest. Like, my hands have been shaking. I've been feeling these things in my body. And so as an empath or a highly sensitive person, or really any person, if you're feeling grief, you really need to pay attention to how you're feeling throughout your body, right? In your mind, in your spirit, in your heart, but also just physically. And, at times you need to create boundaries, right? Like, you want to be there to support the people in your life who are also grieving, but you can't do it at the expense of yourself. So if you need to take some time, you need to take some time. And that may mean like physically, literally being alone. For me, I had to be alone, all alone when this news first hit me. I did not leave my room. The only person I had any physical contact with was my dog. I mean, I guess that's, y'all might not consider him a person. He's my little fur baby, but that was it. I really couldn't interact with people. I couldn't talk on the phone. I was texting people and just letting them know I can't talk right now. And I just couldn't, right? And so you have to accept your limitations and your boundaries when you're going through it, knowing that you're not just feeling your pain, but the pain of others around you. And with that, I think the second thing that I want to offer is that you have to remember that what you resist persists. Okay? Like if you do not allow yourself to feel, and I kind of talked about this already, but I can't emphasize this enough. If you do not allow yourself to go through your grieving process and feel what you need to feel, like if you don't allow yourself to go through that sadness and that anger and all those stages that you need to go through the process, then it's going to keep kind of growing and bubbling below the surface. And it's probably going to manifest in a really unhealthy way. So you really just have to allow yourself to feel, right? I'm not suggesting that you wallow in it, but you need to allow yourself to go through it and process it. With that said, number 3, you really need to take a time out when you need to. Again, the grieving process is not linear. It really can go up and down and all around. One moment you might feel like, I'm okay. I can, I think I can go out with my friends or whatever. And then you might feel like you need to bounce and go home and cry or just be by yourself and have some quiet time. Like you're grieving. Give yourself the time that you need. You can't rush yourself through the process. And if you're supporting somebody going through grief, you can't rush them either, right? Like you really just have to allow the time that is needed to process and to heal. Number 4, and I think this is really tough for empaths. And again, for a lot of people, even people who don't identify as empaths, you have to lean on other people for support. You cannot just take on the weight of this by yourself. I mean, you can, but it's really not healthy or ideal. Now, while empaths definitely need alone time, especially when dealing with heavy emotions, we often isolate ourselves in ways that are not healthy. So if you find that you're doing that, lean on some people for support. I remember the first day, and this has happened to me a few times when really terrible news has hit me, I just could not talk about it at all. And as I allowed myself, over time to talk about it, I found that people, in talking to the right people, that support was really a gift to me. And to that said, if somebody's watching this and you want to support somebody else going through grief, allow them to talk about it on their terms in their time. I really want to thank some of my great friends who, knowing that I've been going through this, haven't been prying or asking a lot of questions. They've just been listening and letting me kind of release as I've needed to release. And that's been through different tragedies in my life. I'm really blessed, I think, to have, cultivated a circle of friends who really understand me and really support me in the way that I need to be supported. So I really suggest that if you're an empath, you really seek out people that are going to be able to support you. And in turn, if you are a person that wants to be supportive of someone else who you think is a really sensitive person, these are the kind of things you can do to help them out. And, last but not least, I think for me, and maybe it's different for you, but for me, what I've really had to come to terms with is that most of the times when it comes to tremendous loss, you're going to want to make sense out of it. And it's never really going to make sense, right? It's not going to make sense. So, even if it makes sense in like a really literal way, right? A, B, C, 2 + 2 = 4. Maybe it's something that from a very tangible standpoint, it's like, okay, if someone in your family, let's say your grandmother gets a terminal illness and she's elderly and then she passes away. On a literal sense, it makes sense that if someone's especially elderly and they get a terminal illness, they're not going to have a lot of time. But there's still a part of you that can't make sense out of why isn't this person here anymore? And so what I really suggest to you is that instead of trying to make sense out of it, because it's going to always feel senseless on some level, try to make meaning out of it instead. And when I say make meaning out of it, I think that can look different ways for different people. For me, this is one of the ways that I'm making meaning out of this loss, right? Finding ways to help other people. Another way that I'm trying to make meaning out of this loss is to really keep the work and legacy alive that I know is important to this person. And so, however that looks for you, I really encourage you to try to find meaning in the face of your loss. If it's not in regards to losing a person, maybe it's in regards to losing a job or a relationship that you cared about. What kind of valuable lessons can you take away from that to really make meaning out of it, even if it doesn't fully make sense? And so those are kind of my thoughts here on dealing with grief, particularly as an empath. Again, pardon me if I was a little rambly. I am still kind of dealing with some shock, but I hope that this was helpful to you. And with that said, I hope that you take care, that you really appreciate all of the great things that you have in your life while you have them, and that as things come to an end, you really learn how to process and heal as you need to. All right, y'all. I'm gonna see y'all later.